The wind rolled low across the plains like a warning, carrying dust, dried grass, and the bitter smell of something long forgotten. As Elias Crowder knelt beside the broken fence post at the edge of his ranch, his hands trembled not from the cold but from a fear he had not felt since the war. Buried beneath that post was something no man should ever have to dig up again. Yet here he was whispering pleas to no one in particular as the sun dipped lower, staining the land red like an old wound reopening. This ranch was not just land to Elias. It was his confession, his punishment, and his final chance at redemption. Every board and every creaking hinge remembered what he had tried to forget years earlier. Back when the Crowder Ranch was alive with cattle and laughter, Elias had been a different man, harder, quicker to anger, quicker to pull a trigger. A man shaped by the cruelty of the Wild West where mercy was weakness and silence was survival. But that silence had cost him everything. One night, under a sky just as red as this one, a wounded stranger rode in begging for shelter. Elias, afraid of lawmen, afraid of trouble, afraid of his own shadow, turned him away. Hours later, a gunshot echoed from the ravine below. The sound never left him. It followed him into sleep, into prayer, into every lonely morning he woke up still breathing. Now, years later, the land itself seemed restless. The fence post had begun sinking strangely into the soil. The cattle refused to go near it, and the old ranch dog howled every night while staring at that very spot. It was as if the earth itself had decided the truth could not stay buried any longer. As Elias loosened the soil with trembling fingers, memories flooded his mind. Dusty gunfights, broken promises, a woman's face slowly fading from memory, and the desperate voice of that stranger saying, "Please, I'm begging you." Those were the same words Elias whispered now as his hand struck something solid beneath the dirt. Not wood, not stone. Carefully brushing the soil away, he revealed a rusted metal box, scarred, locked, and heavier than it should have been. Elias had never seen it before, yet something deep inside told him it had always been meant for him. Some sins wait patiently. As he lifted the box free from the ground, the wind suddenly died and the plains fell silent, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Engraved faintly on the lid were initials he recognized immediately. J.M. They belonged to Jonah Mercer, the wounded stranger he had turned away. The man who begged for help. The man who never made it out of the ravine alive. Years later, Jonah Mercer had returned not as a ghost, but as a reckoning. Elias slowly reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an old key he had carried for years without understanding why. He had found it near the ravine long ago and never managed to throw it away. His hands shook so badly he almost dropped it. Some doors are locked for a reason, but Elias knew that if he didn't open the box now, the truth would follow him to his grave. So he whispered a prayer to a God he was not sure still listened. Then he slid the key into the lock and turned it. The metal snapped open with a sharp sound that echoed across the empty plains. For a long moment, Elias could only stare. Inside the box were not bones, gold, or weapons as he feared. Instead, there was a bundle of letters tied with twine, yellowed with age. Beside them lay a bloodstained sheriff's badge and a folded deed with Elias Crowder's own name written across it. In that moment, Elias realized Jonah Mercer had not arrived at the ranch by accident. That night years ago had not been a random meeting. It had been the final chapter of a story that had begun long before Elias ever owned this land. With trembling hands, he lifted the letters and recognized the handwriting. Immediately, Clara, his wife, who had died 10 years ago, her words, frozen in ink, revealed a truth she never lived long enough to say out loud. Jonah Mercer had been her brother. He had been framed for a crime he never committed and hunted by corrupt lawmen. One of those lawmen had worn the very badge now lying in the box. Dark with dried blood, the badge belonged to Sheriff Dalton, the same man who had helped Elias buy the ranch cheaply after the war. The same man who had sworn Jonah Mercer was an outlaw. The same man Elias had trusted. As the wind returned and dust spiraled across the fields like judgment, Elias continued reading. The deed in the box was the original ownership of the ranch land. It had been stolen, forged, and passed down through lies. Jonah Mercer had come to the Ranch winded not only seeking shelter, but carrying. Proof that could expose everything. Proof Elias had unknowingly buried the moment he turned him away. The guilt struck him harder than any bullet ever had died by choosing fear that night. Elias had allowed injustice to survive. He had built his life on land that belonged to another man's suffering, and now the land demanded payment, not in blood, but in truth. As the sun finally disappeared beyond the horizon, Elias made a decision that would cost him everything and finally give him peace. At first light, he would ride into town. He would bring the letters, the badge, and the deed. He would expose the sheriff's corruption and confess his part in Jonah Mercer's death, even if it meant losing the ranch, his reputation, or his freedom, because redemption in the Wild West never came easily. When dawn arrived, Elias saddled his horse and strapped the metal box behind him. He rode toward town and toward a future he did not deserve but would no longer run from. And when the truth finally surfaced, when records cleared Jonah Mercer's name and history remembered him not as an outlaw but as a victim, something changed. Grass began to grow again where just once ruled, and for the first time in years, the land of the Crowder Ranch seemed able to breathe.